This morning via Twitter, I received a form of a question from a soccer coach who showed a quote from Andres Iniesta of Barcelona and kind of, questioned, I suppose, how we account for this or how we teach and develop this skill. And so the quote from Iniesta is, "Most things come from inside. They're intuitive. That's the way I am. There's tactics, strategy, but I understand football as something unpredictable because you have to decide in a thousandth of a second. If the ball is coming and there's someone behind you, I'm not thinking I'm going left or should it be right. I just go and it comes off. Well, sometimes it doesn't." And so I think there's a lot of things that go into this comment. The first off, he says it comes from inside and it's intuitive, which I would tend to agree with. There's a lot to do with intuition and the way that decisions are made by players, as he says, in a tenth or a thousandth of a second. And so one thing is, I think that decisions are made so quickly in the game that we can't really put a true decision-making model upon their decisions. The second part of that, however, is though, as soon as he talks about it coming from the inside, he immediately refers to the environment and what's happening in front of him, or in this case behind him. So there's somebody behind him, the ball is coming to him. And these factors affect the decision that he's going to make. If there wasn't that defender behind him, he'd likely make a different decision. If the ball was coming to him at a different angle, he'd likely make a different decision. And so these environmental or task constraints affect the decision that's made. And so to me, what happens is within the environment and the task that's being used or the skill that's being used and the individual skill, these things interact. And that's one of the things that we talk about within the dynamic systems theory and ecological psychology is the interaction of the environment, task, and individual creating an action or a movement or a skill. So in this case, Iniesta sees, reads, or feels something in the environment. So a player of his ability and talent may not even need to see that defensive player behind him. He may simply feel that presence. Or, as I've argued previously, he may actually hear the presence, the footsteps coming, the deep breathing, coming towards his back. And because he can hear and he can feel that presence, he's able to turn away from it. And so it's that cue that triggers the movement. And so he doesn't, at a verbal or a conscious level or a cognitive level, he doesn't think, okay, I hear breathing to my right, I'm going to turn left. It's there and he turns. And, I think I talked about this in one of the previous videos in terms of just my soccer refereeing, because I think that's one of the things that referees use to try to stay out of the way when we're trying to get nice and close to play, to be there to make calls, but we don't want to get in the way of players. And so, if the ball's in front of me, I can't be looking behind me to see where players are, so I have to have that feel for where a player is, just like a player on the field has to have a feel for his opponents and his teammates. And so, I've realized that I rely on listening for footsteps and listening for breathing and things like that, as well as anticipating where I expect players to be or where I expect them to move based on what's happening in the play. And often when I end up getting in the way of a player, it's because they do something unexpected. I expect a right-footed player to cut back to shoot on goal with their right foot, but instead they continue going to their left. Is something that happened to me one time on the edge of the box. So I think, from a decision-making standpoint, we can't really 100% know what's going on with these decisions because they happen so quickly. But I do believe that through experience and through trial and error, we start to perceive these different cues in the environment, and that's how decisions are made before we even get to the cognitive or the verbal level. And that's why oftentimes players are unable to explain why they made a decision, and they write it off as intuition, or in the media they say that they have eyes in the back of their head. and things like this, because we're unable to really describe, what happens, because those who are at that ability and those who have that ability to make those quick decisions, can't really verbalize it, because there isn't a verbal thought process, because verbalizing and going through that cognitive decision-making process would take too long, and would take more than that thousandth of a second that he has to, make a decision or make a play in the game. So without this model, we tried our best to put terms around it, and because of the terms aren't 100% accurate, because in a lot of ways he's not making a decision, because a decision would take some form of cognitive thought. He's more or less reacting to a cue in the environment that he likely perceives at a subcognitive level. And so, again, to me, the best way to develop these skills is to have lots of experiences and more varied experiences. The more varied one's experiences in the game, the more likely that the player will have been in that situation before when they come to it during a game. So if a player like Iniesta plays a lot of street soccer growing up, a lot of futsal, different things, tight positions, he has more repetitions in this situation where there's a player behind him and he has to go right or left, ball approaching, how's he going to move off of the defensive player? Whereas if he was only in, a more traditional American type soccer practice where, we pass the ball from line to line, and we don't have to account for where a defensive player is. We don't have to make a decision of where we're going to go with the ball. We don't have to react to anything in the environment. We're not really building up this level of expertise. So then when we get in a game and the ball comes to us and there's a defensive player behind us, we have to revert to a more cognitive type of decision, because we can't just react because we've never been in that situation before. So now players end up stopping the ball, looking right or left to see where that player is, and then making the decision of where they're going to go. A lot of times you can see this in youth basketball, because we teach players catch and triple threat, and then they look and then they make a decision, as opposed to knowing what they're going to do on the catch, because they've, their eyes are open, they're surveying the court, they know where they are, they know if they're in their range, they know how much space they need to be able to shoot comfortably without feeling pressure. And so they catch the ball and they don't have to think, okay, I caught the ball, all right, my defensive player is 7 feet off of me, that gives me sufficient time to be able to shoot without a strong contest. Therefore, now I'm going to raise into my shot, go through all the different elements of my shot, and shoot the ball. That would take too long. So instead, we catch the ball, we have this feeling that we're open, and we've predetermined in a lot of ways that this feeling means that we should shoot, so we catch and we shoot. And the more we're in situations where we're developing this feel, developing this intuition, the better and more accurate and quicker our decisions become. And so if we spend all our time, only shooting, shots in practice with no defense, no decision-making element, no external factors, coach tells you to shoot, so you shoot, then we may struggle in a game in this situation because we're not sure. And we have to resort to a more cognitive decision-making model where we either decide before we catch, okay, I'm going to shoot, and now there's a defensive player, and so I don't know what to do. Do I continue my shot? Do I shot fake? I'm unprepared because I haven't been put in these situations and had these experiences with that defender. So the more times that I can go against a defensive player and something similar, and the more varied these experiences, playing against bigger players, shorter players, longer players, more athletic players, slower players, the more variance that I have in opposition, the greater the depth of my experience, and consequently the more situations I'm going to be prepared to face during games. And to me, this is how we develop expertise, and how we become adaptive decision makers during game situations because we can perceive these cues often at a level that we're unable to verbalize or explain. And so we have this feeling or intuition, and that's where we make the decisions. And ultimately, because of that, we can make quicker and more accurate decisions, which makes us into better players.